Today we're looking principally at the Leatherman Squirt PS4 as well as the P4 and asking a question people are still asking roughly 3 years after Leatherman quietly retired it. Is the PS4 still the king of the keychain plier multi-tools? And if not, who inherited the throne? Because this is not just a collector thing for me, mine still has a job. And here it is. This is my Squirt PS4. It no longer lives on a keychain. These days it holds court in my sewing kit, basically the retirement home for multi-tools, light duties, soft materials and occasional supervision. And yes, the scissors are already open. That's not laziness. That's not me forgetting to put it away properly. If you know, you know. And if you don't know, stick around, because that little detail tells you quite a lot about why this tool is no longer in production and why replacing it is not as simple as it should be. So what were or are the Squirt P4 and the PS4? Why do people still care? And has anything naturally stepped into the gap they left behind? Because lots of companies make small multi-tools and lots of companies make keychain tools. But tiny pliers, a whole host of other tools and Leatherman build quality in a package this small, that is a very specific little kingdom. The earlier Squirt P4 was already a seriously useful tiny plier tool. Then the crown passed to the PS4. It retained the pliers, added scissors, and for a while it felt like the obvious ruler of this tiny little category. King Squirt PS4 of House Leatherman. He became, however, the last of his line and the heirless king, which is a somewhat melodramatic and goofy way of saying Leatherman retired the PS4 and the tiny tool throne has been disputed ever since. So prior to looking at the pretenders to the throne, House Gerber, House NexTool and a few others, we need to look properly at the old king. Before we start looking for any potential successors for the Leatherman Squirt, we need to be clear what we're actually trying to replace. Now, this is the Leatherman Squirt P4 and this is the Leatherman Squirt PS4. Officially, these are both keychain size multi-tools. Personally, they're right at the outside limit of what I'd want on a keychain. My happy place is more like a 58mm Victorinox Classic SD, and the Squirt is right at the edge of the envelope. In fact, before I settled on the SOG PowerPint as my regular jeans pocket carry, this P4 was what I carried in my fifth pocket, alongside the little Olight flashlight, which is still there. So for me, the Squirt sits in an interesting place. Officially, yes, it's a keychain multi-tool. For me, it was my fifth pocket tool. And if you want to see what my actual pocket carry looks like now, I'll include a link to the pocket carry video in the pinned comment. It should also be up here somewhere, but stay with me for now and you can go and look later on. Both of these tools do have proper keychain carry built in. On each one, there's a little moving eyelet attached through the pivot or rivet, and then that connects to this tiny split ring. So they're clearly supposed to live on a keychain. When closed, both of these measure 5.7 centimeters or 2.3 inches. In terms of weight, they weigh just under 2 ounces, so the P4 1.94 and the translating to 56 grams for the PS4 and 55 grams for the P4. So very similar in both weight and dimensions. So these are tiny, but they don't feel like novelty key rings. They feel like proper little Leathermans that have been zapped by a clumsy Rick Moranis. Before we go through the tools, one little thing on this PS4. Now this one is obviously second hand. You can see it says to AJ from Dad with a heart, and then we've got 2015 on there as well. Now I quite like that. It gives the tool a bit of a life before me. So AJ, if you're out there and you desperately want your Squirt back, I mean, we can talk. No promises, but we can talk. Anyway, sentimental engraving aside, this is the one that lives in my sewing kit. One important construction point, these are riveted together, and that matters because if something breaks, this is not like undoing a few screws, dropping in a new part and putting it back together. That becomes important when we talk about the PS4 scissors, because Leatherman's current warranty wording says there is no repair option for the squirt. They replace it with a micro, which is a scissor, not plier based tool. So when people talk about why the squirt disappeared, I think this is a big part of the story. Tiny tool, riveted construction, 25-year warranty, and if something breaks, you may be replacing the whole tool rather than one little part. The shared core of both the P4 and the PS4 is the plier head. Tiny spring action needle nose pliers with onboard wire cutters. For something this small, I think the plier head is really nicely designed. The tips are well aligned, they meet properly, and even though the serrations run all the way down the jaws, they'll still grab very fine things right at the tip, and they grip them really well. Further down the jaws, they widen out a little, so you can still get onto a small nut or a slightly thicker part, and the wire cutters are obviously tiny, but for thin wire and even some zip ties, they're perfectly usable. Now, these are not full-size pliers, of course they're not, but this is the bit a classic SD simply can't do. And that's the whole reason the squirt is difficult to replace. Lots of small tools have blades, lots have scissors, lots have files, but tiny usable pliers in this size frame, that's where the list gets much shorter. Both tools have small 420 HC blades, and honestly, I think the blades are good. They're not exciting, but they don't need to be. For packaging, tape, cord, little cutting jobs, they're absolutely fine for tools this size. On a keychain or fifth pocket tool, that's all I'm really asking for. A small competent blade that cuts when I need it and doesn't take over the whole tool. Now, both the P4 and the PS4 have proper little files, and this is one area where the squirt really earns respect. On the wider faces, the files appear to be basically the same, one flatter side, one cross-cut side, and both are excellent for a tool this small. Every time I review a small multi-tool, I ask my wife to give me her opinion on the file as a nail file. She's always very honest, and these got the big thumbs up. The difference between these two, though, is on the edge. On the P4, I really wouldn't want to use that edge as a saw unless I'd blocked off the entire afternoon. The teeth don't even run all the way to the end. There's about 7mm near the tip where it goes smooth. On the PS4, the edge teeth go all the way to the end and they are more aggressive. I still wouldn't call it a proper saw, but it's definitely rougher and more useful than the edge on the P4. And this matters because some modern mini tools have files that look like files but don't really behave like files, and they get a meh face from my wife, and no one wants that, believe me. The squirt behaves like a file. Both of these tools have small drivers and both have cap lifters. The cap lifter's not glamorous, it opens bottles. Nothing amazing, but it does work. The more interesting bit is this 2D flat and Phillips style driver. Now, after testing this properly, I'd call it a generalist small Phillips flat driver. It seems happiest in a PH1 screw, although it will work on a PH2, but there's a bit more wiggle in there because it's relatively flat and 2D. It'll even go up to a PH3, but there the wiggle is even more noticeable. But they do work. And this one on the P4 is identical to the one on the PS4. Same capabilities, same profile. Now, the P4 deserves credit for a couple of things the PS4 doesn't have. First off, the awl. Leatherman, call it an awl, so I'll call it an awl. There's no sewing eye, there's nothing fancy, but for poking and marking or making a small hole, doing some scraping or tiny controlled damage without using the blade, this is a very useful tool. And I do think it's a shame that this didn't transition across to the PS4. I genuinely miss it on here. The P4 also has this tiny eyeglass flathead driver. Now it does work very nicely on the tiny screws that you get on glasses or spectacles or eyeglasses, or whatever you want to call them. So yeah, as you can see, that screw there is moving around here. However, there's a bit of redundancy here because if you look at the 2D Phillips, the end of that is flat and it's only like a millimeter less wide than this one. So if we have a go at this in my glasses as well, you can see that it works equally well. So the dedicated eyeglass driver is useful, but maybe not quite as essential as I first thought. Still, between the awl and this extra tiny driver, the P4 is not just the older one, it has its own little advantages as well. And now we get to the big PS4 feature, the scissors. This is what the P4 didn't have, and this is why the PS4 became such a beloved little tool. It keeps the tiny pliers, but it adds usable scissors, and that combination is the whole reason that this tool is hard to replace, but it's also the area of concern. Now, when the scissors are closed, this little spring is permanently metal under tension, heading down a perilous highway. Three-part question for the comments: highway to where, who sang it, and what film soundtrack was that from? Anyway, back to the world's least glamorous warranty problem. The scissor spring on the PS4 has a reputation. You'll see people online talk about heat treatment, work hardening and springs breaking even when the tool is closed and supposedly at rest. There are also community reports of back springs breaking when the tool has been dropped. So this doesn't seem to be the kind of small tool that really enjoys rough treatment. And to be fair, no tiny keychain tool really wants to be thrown around. But the PS4 does seem to have built up a bit of a rep here. Now, I'm not going to pretend that Leatherman have issued a signed confession on any of this, but it does fit with a wider problem. Because remember, these are riveted together. So if the scissor spring breaks or a back spring breaks, that is not an easy service job. And Leatherman's current warranty wording says there is no repair option for the Squirt. They replace it with a micro, which is a scissor-based tool without any sort of plier. So we can't say every detail of the discontinuation is officially confirmed, but we can fairly deduce that a tiny riveted tool with a fragile spring reputation sitting under a 25-year warranty became awkward to support. And that is why mine lives in the sewing kit with the scissors open. So how good are the scissors? Let's try them out on paper. So yeah, for paper they're fine, they're nice and accurate, and they can get through multiple layers of paper. Obviously for a sewing kit I want it to be able to do threads, so yeah, there we go, no problem there. Here we go, here's some baling twine, so let's try that out. Yeah, gets through that. So paracord, this is where it starts to struggle. It won't do it in one motion, but if you go through it a few times, it will eventually get there. But this is the limit. Now, to be fair, this is an old discontinued tool. It's not factory fresh, so I'm not going to pretend this is a perfect performance test. Some of that could be age, wear, tired edges, or just the realistic limit of tiny keychain scissors. And this is where I have to be fair. Not everything can live up to the 58mm Victorinox scissors, which are just astoundingly good. But the Victorinox doesn't have pliers. So this isn't 58mm beat Squirt. They're solving different problems. The Victorinox wins the tiny scissors contest, and the Squirt wins the tiny pliers and scissors all in one tool contest. So my feelings on these are pretty strong. Apart from the PS4 scissor spring issue, which is a clear area for concern, I think these are excellent little tools. Both have decent little 428C blades. Both have really good files. I mean, really good files. They've got bottle openers do the job, and both have competent little generalist screwdrivers. Now, the P4 deserves credit for the awl, which I genuinely miss on the PS4. The PS4 deserves credit because it adds scissors while keeping the pliers, and that combination is exactly why people still miss it. So any proper successor to the king of the keychain throne should give us a proper mini plier capability, a real file, a useful blade, some sensible drivers, and ideally some scissors, while staying firmly in the keychain multi-tool category. And later on, I'm going to show you a useful little hack that makes these things even more difficult to replace. But first, let's have a look at the competition. So these are the three serious claimants from house NexTool, the Mini Flagship and the Mini Sailor, and from house Gerber the Dime. There are other tools that we could talk about, the Roxon M2 and M3, the SOG PowerPint, the Lever Gear Edge XT, and 58mm Victorinoxes, NexTool E1, and the Flex Mini Companion. But most of those fail the most basic of tests. Some don't have pliers, and some are brilliant in their own right, but they're solving a different problem. So for the succession crisis, these are the three that matter. Can any of them actually take the throne? Let's start with the NexTool Mini Flagship, and you'll notice something different about this straight away. And that is that it is as much a scissor-based tool as it is a plier-based tool. These scissors that it has are absolutely tremendous, especially when you compare them to something as small as those on the PS4. The plier head is also very good. It's nice and big and is actually quite a bit bigger than the plier head on the Leatherman Squirt. It's also spring-loaded, nicely aligned, has decent gripping here for needles via these serrations, so it would be good for sewing in the same way that I use this. And all in all, it's a pretty good tool. There are, however, some issues that I have with this. For example, the file, which lives on this flat head screwdriver, this is really not aggressive at all. It's very difficult to get anything from there. And on the flat side, it's very weak. It's just only good for polishing, really. Unfortunately, when I asked my wife what she thought of it as a nail file, it got the meh face, which isn't good. According to her, it was just not aggressive enough, even on the crosscut side. And the flat file side was even more disappointing. Something I will say, the cap lifter and can opener it's a combo tool, pretty good, and there is a decent blade on the NexTool Flagship. Now this is actually the second iteration of the NexTool Flagship. The very early ones, of which I had one, the back spring broke on the plier head. And since this came out, they have actually brought out the NexTool Flagship F12, which has upgraded materials and a better overall spec. And I'm glad they've done that. Now, apparently the file is actually much better than this one. They've added a pocket clip. The blade steel has been improved. The scissors have serrated edges now. And overall, the steel of the implements has been greatly improved as well. However, one thing that hasn't changed is it's not any smaller. And this, in general, is where the main problem is. If you look at the size difference between the Leatherman Squirt and the NexTool Flagship, it's really quite sizable. And where we see that the Squirt is actually 57 millimeters, the NexTool Flagship is like 65 millimeters just in length. And in terms of width, it is at least 1.5 times as wide. All iterations of the mini flagship for me basically feel like a compact multi-tool that are trying to squeeze into the keychain kingdom. And for me, that is not quite the same thing as inheriting the Squirt throne. The Mini Sailor is more interesting to me because it feels closer to understanding the actual brief. Now this is my older version, not the newer S11 Pro. And looking at this one as it sits here, you can see the idea is strong. It's slightly smaller than the Flagship, but still big in comparison to the Squirt. The pliers are decent, and it has scissors, which I think are very good. As you can see, the spring is much thinner than on the PS4, and it just goes to show that design trumps materials, especially at folder weight, and is absolutely key in making a functional tool. The drivers are good. You get a flathead and a 2D Phillips, and there's also a SIM extractor. There's a combo opener tool. Now I wouldn't want to open a can with something this small though, and on the newer S11 Pro, that can opener has been taken away to make space for a much needed file, which from all reports is a great crosscut and diamond file. The S11 Pro also improves on the blade steel and the implement steel, and that file addition makes perfect sense. So I like the idea of travel, I like the overall thinking, and I like that NexTool are improving these tools. But, and this is the important bit, the size has not really changed between this one and the newer S11 Pro. And that really matters, because the question isn't, can NexTool make a better spec sheet? The question is, can they give me Squirt-like functional density in a keychain sized package? Because a keychain multi-tool has to win on convenience first, portability first, size first. Then we can talk about steals and refinements. The Mini Sailor probably has one of the better claims here, especially in its newer form. It understands the idea of a small plier-based tool with scissors, and the newer file makes far more sense. The idea is strong, the direction is good, but the crown is not automatically won just because the spec sheet improved. Again, it comes down to size, weighing in at almost 2.9 ounces, which is around 50% heavier than the Squirt, and 2.65 inches long. As with the Mini Flagship, it just feels like its natural home is the fifth pocket and not a keychain. And then we come to the Gerber Dime. This is probably the one that most people will suggest first. And from the outside, I understand why. Now, if you ignore this bottle opener protrusion for a second, the Dime is probably the closest of these three to the Squirt in size. So visually, it looks like the most obvious heir. Keychain size, scissors, blade, pliers, small screwdrivers. On paper, House Gerber has a very strong claim. But once in the hand, the problems start appearing very quickly. Okay, first there's this exposed bottle opener. Now, I understand the idea. It means you always have a cap lifter available without opening the tool. But as a fifth pocket object, I really don't like it. It sticks out, it catches, and frankly, it makes me slightly nervous about carrying it somewhere tight. I do like this though. I wanted to show you this clever little innovation. As you can see, one of the torque screws holding it together is smaller than the rest and offset to one side. And similarly, one of these scales is actually thicker than all of the rest. That's this one here. And that allows them to incorporate a tweezer in this one scale. Now, scale tools on a keychain plier tool, that's impressive in anyone's book. Then there's this, the package opener. And to be fair, the package opener itself is very good. I like it. It's probably one of the best ideas on the Dime, but it's a fairly long implement and the whole side of this is just bare. That feels like wasted space. This could have been a file surface or a depth gauge or something. On a keychain multi-tool, empty metal is expensive real estate, and that matters even more because the actual file on the Dime is tiny. It's actually on the two-dimensional Phillips driver, and between the small size, the split ring placement, which let's not forget will probably have a load of keys attached to it, as well as that bottle opener protrusion getting in the way, using it as a file would be a huge challenge. And then we get to the pliers. Now, the Dime plier head looks promising, but the jaws only really meet right at the very tip. Now, these grooves are quite widely spaced, so when you're trying to grip something very fine, like a small needle or a pin or something, it doesn't quite inspire the same confidence as the Squirt. And that is a serious problem because tiny pliers are the whole point of this category. So the Dime is frustrating. It's probably the closest on size. It's probably the most obvious modern answer, and it's still available. But this exposed bottle opener, the awkward file, the wasted space on the package opener, and the less precise plier head all stop it feeling like the true Air. So useful? Yes. Interesting? Definitely. Is it the king though? Not for me. So where does that leave us? House NexTool have some genuinely good ideas, but they appear to be moving away from keychain minimalism that made the Squirt special and towards the compact category. House Gerber with the Dime gets closest on size, but compromises too much in areas where the Squirt was strongest, namely the plier head and the file. And then the exposed cap lifter is always there, sticking out like it was designed by a urologist trying to drum up some trade. And this is the real lesson. A keychain multi-tool is not just a small multi-tool. It's a convenience tool. And its usefulness is defined by its functional density, i.e. how much useful capability can you pack into something small enough that people will actually attach their keys to it. That was the Squirt's trick, and that's why the throne is still so difficult to claim. So by my judgment, there is no true successor to the king of the keychain throne. For me right now, the throne sits empty. And one thing I've actually learned while making this video is that maybe the last great king wasn't the PS4 at all. Maybe it was the P4. Now the P4 wasn't perfect. It had the same riveted construction, which clearly makes repair and warranty support a nightmare. But that was really its one major structural flaw. Then the PS4 inherited the crown, the riveted construction, and it came with a cursed royal scepter, the Scissors, with their unpopular spring and metal under tension, even when closed. And that brings me to what I'd actually want from a new king of the keychain. First off, size. Now for me, the Squirt, as I've said before, is already at the edge of what I'd want on a keychain. So the target should be roughly Squirt sized, about 2.25 inches long, 0.8 of an inch wide, half an inch thick, and around 2 ounces. Again, the phrase here is functional density. As many genuinely useful functions as possible in as little wasted space as possible. Second, repairability. No rivets. Use torque screws if something breaks, especially on a tool with a long warranty. It should not require replacing the whole multi-tool. Third, the pliers. Well aligned, spring loaded, needle nose pliers with serrations that can grip fine objects all the way down to something like a thin sewing needle. Fourth, a decent blade. So a small drop point or spear point style blade like the Squirt, but with a conventional V-grind this time, so it's easier for normal people to sharpen. Fifth, a real file. The PS4 file was excellent for a tool this size. I'd maybe even grind down the very tip of the flat file side into a small chisel or scraper for some added functionality. Sixth, scissors. They don't need to be miracle scissors if they can handle paper, thread, string, thin fabric, and maybe regular paracord at the very upper limit. That's enough. But the spring must be right. Don't want any heat treatment drama. And when the scissors are put away, the spring should not be sitting there under tension. Seventh, drivers. A useful 2D Phillips / flat driver, and with that same precision flathead tip for glasses, because none of us are getting any younger. Then the large flathead and cap lifter. And ideally, and this is where I may be asking too much, that cap lifter should be shaped so that it can fit diagonally into one of those cheap Ganzo 1/4-inch bit adapters without any modification. And these things are usually around $5 on AliExpress. Because here's the little hack I promised earlier. I've modified this Ganzo adapter so that it fits here onto the cap lifter so that it can be used as a 1/4-inch bit adapter for the Leatherman Squirt, which lets the Squirt drive standard 1/4-inch hex bits. So to do this is pretty straightforward. It requires a metal jigsaw blade which has been trimmed down so that it will fit inside the adapter. It requires equal sawing on 2 opposite corners, a lot of patience and repeated testing so as not to overcook the stew. Don't use a mechanical jigsaw to do this. I tried and nearly took a finger off. Use a multi-tool with a T-shank adapter and a vise if you have them, or just do it with your hands while binge watching Game of Thrones. And once you do this, you can use a 1/4-inch to 4mm adapter and carry a small bit set separately. A couple of nice to haves would be laser engraved ruler markings on the inside, and maybe one thicker scale with an offset smaller screw similar to the Dime to accommodate a Phillips microdriver implement like this one from the Wave Plus, but with a wider, flatter handle with crosscut lines for grip and applying a bit of torque when using. So that's the challenge to Leatherman, Gerber, NexTool, Roxon, or whichever noble house wants to answer the call. Give us a true Squirt successor. Tiny pliers, dependable scissors, a real file, repairable construction, no wasted space, high functional density, and above all, keep it genuinely keychainable, because convenience is the crown. So now I want your ideas. What would you put in the next true plier-based keychain multi-tool? What should stay from the Squirt? What should absolutely not come back? And is there already a tool out there you think I've overlooked? If you've made it this far, then you're exactly the person who has an opinion on this, so leave it in the comments. This video is massively overshot, so thank you massively for watching. And join me next time on the Clown's Pocket, where I will be looking at another loaner tool that needs to go back to its owner, the Victorinox Explorer. Thanks again, all the best, and bye-bye.